Let's invite Susan to come and share with us about her work in Andover. Susan?
I feel like we need another amen. Yeah. So while we're getting my PowerPoint loaded here, I'm going to be giving you a lot of information. So get your paper and your pencils ready because I'm going to give you a lot of facts and figures today that you can go away with and change this state. So be ready for that. So who am I? Why am I here today on your agenda? Why am I talking about education advocacy? And why is this important? Well, to start answering these questions and to set the stage for our conversation today, because I want it to be a conversation, I'm not a school expert. I have a business degree in management, and I've been in the insurance industry for the last 15 years. So if many of you want to already walk out the door, that's okay. So usually when I say insurance, people cringe. But what I am today is I'm a parent, I'm a volunteer, and I'm a caring citizen of this state. And I have real concerns where education is in our state today. Can you relate to any of those descriptors? I know many of you are volunteers, you're parents. So this conversation is important for you. So let me just dig right into our schools. We have 3 children. One just graduated and is a freshman at Baker University in Baldwin. We have a 9th grader. Oh, do we have Baker grads here? Yay! We have a 9th grader and we have an 8th grader at Andover Middle School. We are very supportive of their public education. Thank you. Where do I point this? Okay, all right. We are very supportive of their public education and the experience that they're getting, but I don't live in a bubble in Northeast Wichita, Kansas. I know that our state has real challenges and has faced real challenges for the last several years. Why are we having these challenges? It's because of poor policy. Yes, I said it, poor policy in our state that is being passed by our lawmakers. It's not just about the funding either. We don't need funding just to pad our checkbooks and to say what districts have the most money in the state. It's about preparing our students for the future, our future business leaders, our philanthropists, our doctors, our lawyers, and just successful human beings that will contribute back to our society. That's why I'm standing here today and want to give you this information so you can go out and be those difference makers too. So the question is, are we able to do this and educate our children across the state equally among all school districts? I think the answer is no. And let me give you some few facts on why I think that. 50% of Kansas school-age kids are on free and reduced lunch. We educate nearly 500,000 students in our state. In the year 2000, a third of our kids were on free or reduced lunch. That number has creeped up. You do the math. Students with special needs have increased 40% since 2000. And special needs in this case can be defined as mental or emotional needs, physical needs, learning disabilities. But studies have showed that these students cost more to educate. We need to get them to the same standards that our other students are at to live great lives and to achieve, but it costs more money to do this. Student enrollment in Kansas has increased since 2008. However, the student population has become more diverse, with large increases in Hispanic and even multiple ethnicities in each home. This is great for Kansas. Diversity benefits us all, but the needs of these students are different. Disabled, non-English speakers, homeless students, they take more effort to educate in a good way. We need this diversity. Please do not get me wrong on that. But to get these students to be performing with their peers at same graduation rates and being able to be those even potential college readiness students, we need more funding and more efforts to get them there. Kansas school funding has fallen from 24th to 30th compared against the national average since 2009. And Kansas ranks in the bottom third of states in per pupil funding. And this rank has been declining since 2009, when Kansas was 24th. Now we're 31st. Kansas schools have much to celebrate. I don't want to talk about just the negative, but what you will see here are trends. We've got to focus on the trends. Our state is doing very well when it comes to achievement. We rank 9th in the United States, while our funding ranks 31st. What does that tell you? We have amazing teachers and administrators. We're very efficient at what we do. But I'll use the analogy of stretching a rubber band. When it stretches and you can start to see those mini fibers start to break and they change color and it weakens and then it pops. We don't want to get to that state, and we're starting to see the weakening of those fibers. So what are advocates like myself doing here in this state? What we are doing is we're building community connections. We're going out and doing what I'm doing here today. Advocacy has been very siloed in the past. It's been very focused on what's going on in your own school district, but that's changing. We're networking across the state, sharing ideas, holding roundtables, partnering with other organizations, and much, much more. This is all very exciting to me, but it's only just begun. We have got to do more. Some of you might think, well, what has bolstered this education advocacy? Where did we get this energy to make changes? Well, we could go back to 1999 when the first funding litigation was filed in the Montoy case, but I would need this whole stage filled with whiteboards and a whole bunch of dry erase markers and a lot of time to explain where we have been. But then we could also go back to 2008 when our state elected you-know-who, or from our Harry Potter fans, the guy that should not be named. But we'll actually start in 2012, and I think Paul Davis said it best. There is no feasible way that private sector growth can accommodate the price tag of this tax cut, which means our $600 million surplus will become a $2.5 billion deficit in just 5 years. Folks, he had the crystal ball, and the crystal ball came to reality, unfortunately, in our case. And I remember Brownback using this term, because I just moved to the state around that time, saying, this is a real-life experience in supply-side economics. Well, again, business degree, I don't remember studying that this was going to be a positive supply-side economic issue. But again, I am from Missouri, and I went to Missouri State, so some of you may say that I'm not educated very well. Let's move on to 2013. A funding plan was devised for Kansas in 2006 through a settlement of a prior lawsuit, but the groups filed suit again in 2010 when the state made an estimated $300 million in funding cuts. The state made even more cuts in 2011, unfortunately, and there have been a total of $500 million in cuts to base funding for our schools between fiscal years 2009 and 2012. I found this picture and I thought it said so much here. This is actually from the Kansas Value Institute in 2012 in a mailer. I see people taking pictures. I want to make sure you get it. So more facts and figures in 2014. Nearly 50% of our districts have seen an average class size grow. We've had 19,000 new students to our district, but we have laid off or gotten rid of 665 teachers. We have about 50% of our districts that have reduced or eliminated extracurricular sports or activities. And similar to Andover, we now have a fee, like a pay-to-play fee for all of our kids when they do sports. Many families can't afford that. So what type of experience are we giving our kids because they can't pay the fee to play? We can do more, like I said. What are people doing? Here's some logos of some advocacy groups, and I'm going to talk briefly across our state. These groups are doing wonderful things, and they do it very differently, which is the way it should be. Advocacy has to work for your community, so everything is not going to look the same. But let me talk about Educate Andover pretty quick. Anyone in the room heard of Educate Andover? Awesome, great. So who are we? We are a group of parents, grandparents, and community members dedicated to educating the public on issues facing Kansas public schools. Pretty simple, right? I think this is a pretty impactful statement. And how are we doing that? Well, let me start back from the beginning on how we formed. We actually formed in 2004 because of a parent moving into our district from Denver. And there was a parent legislative council that she was on, and we had nothing like this in Andover. And so she actually brought this to the Board of Education and the superintendent, and this group formed, and it actually formed under the umbrella of the school. And so during those cuts of school funding during those years, there was a lot of activities that were done. Letter writing campaigns, visiting with legislatures, holding forums. But what we really felt at Educate Andover is that we weren't able to really have those tough conversations and hold our legislators to task, because if we're operating under a school district, those lines have to be drawn pretty clear. But what better way to do that is to get some parents and grandparents and community members involved that really wanted to have a different conversation. So we started working the streets in a good way. We went out to our PTO sites, we went out to our different council meetings, and we just started sharing the message. We started letting people know that what was happening in Topeka does affect Andover. It affects Liberal, it affects Dodge City, it affects Johnson County, it affects everywhere. But we have our lawmakers in Topeka saying that everything is just fine on the education front. Well, that really was not the case. So we started, like I said, hitting the pavement. We did a lot of candidate meet and greets, especially for our local Board of Education. But we were not formed as a political action committee, and I'll talk about another group that has formed that way. We formed since we did not form as a political action committee, we did not come out, and we still do not come out and endorse candidates, but we try to focus on the issues and make people aware of how our candidates are voting. And unfortunately in Andover, which many of you may live in that school district area, 5 of the 6 of our legislators say that they're pro-public ed candidates, but they do not vote that way. In fact, this last May, we had 2 of our representatives actually bashing the Andover School District during the veto session on the House floor. And if you want to see that video, just let me know and I can send it to you. It's pretty sad. It's pretty sad that these are the people that are representing us and making those decisions on our school kids, and it just infuriates me. So Educate Andover really has held them to task, and what we tried to do is, like I said, get out the vote, let them know what's going on, and that we're watching them. And in fact, I have a funny story. One of our senators, I was up in Topeka last winter and tried to get a meeting with him, and he wouldn't meet with us. But some may call me a stalker. I was walking the hallways and I ran into him, and I shook his hand and smiled and played the nice game, and he goes, "Oh, I know who you are. You have that little education group." And I wanted to say, "Yes, we do, and we are watching you, so you better beware of what you're doing, buddy." But I say that, and I'm not a confrontational person. We are very thankful of those legislators who are making good decisions upon our state, because I know it's not easy. But I just give you an example of hitting your head on the brick wall constantly and trying to have these conversations, and there's just no one to listen. It is just frustrating beyond belief. So an organization that has done a great job of giving information is Game On. And I actually am wearing their shirt today. I don't know if you can see it. Another bright, lovely color sunflower shirt here. They are a group out of Johnson County that focuses on policy issues. They do not endorse, or endorse is the wrong word, they do not focus on issues in local school districts in their area. They focus on the issues and the policies across our state. And they have done a fantastic job in making aware of all of the facts and figures that are going on in Topeka that are affecting all of our kids. They started as a nonpartisan group. They still are labeled as nonpartisan. They're a leadership group of 15 parents, and they're a 501c4. And the issues that they really focus on are proponent for suitable funding, as it requires in our Constitution to provide. They're opposed to ALEC agendas, vouchers, and charters, which we're seeing those words come up more and more in our state. They're opposed to other bad education policy, as we all should. And related issues like tax reform, tax cuts, judicial retention and selection, This all goes together, and so they do a great job of putting those information out there for us. Their Facebook is very important, or very great, and if any of you are social media followers, like and follow Game On, and also follow their Twitter feed. They are fantastic at doing that. As opposed to Educate Andover, we really try to use social media, but it's just hard to keep up with it, especially during the legislative session when things are changing daily. So I really encourage you to follow Game On. Like I said, their Twitter's great. Their website is a great tool, and let me tell you why. So all of their social media posts, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, they put on their website, and you can actually search for these things. On social media, you cannot do a search, so you can't put in a keyword on amendment and it come up. So they have really used their website as a tool. They do other fun things to raise awareness, like they've done 4 60-mile walks to Topeka, and many of the advocacy groups across the state will participate with them. What they do really well is testify in the legislature, whether it's written communication or whether it's actually going and doing live testimony and committee work. It's just fantastic on what they're able to do. And they've actually trained some of us in the education advocacy world to write testimony. So Educate Andover has written a few testimonies in this last legislative session. Vote counts. Remember my story about we're watching you? Well, Game On watches everyone, and they show how everyone votes. And that's public record. That's not putting anything out there emotional. It's just saying who are the yays and who are the nays, and do you want those that are making decisions representing you that way? So it's just another tool to let people know what's going on. Postcard chronicles. This is probably one of my favorite things that they do. How many of you got, just in this last primary election, got postcards in the mail? Yeah. We got 5 in 1 week from a lady who wasn't even in our district. So what Game On does is they take these postcards and they put them on their social media feeds, and they say, this is true and this is not true. They try to educate us just like the ads that are on TV. They try to let us know what, those keywords that get people's attention out there. They try to say, this is the true facts. This is what you really should believe. So that's a wonderful thing that they do. Rosters. So kind of getting back to that sports analogy with the whole Game On theme, they're putting together those representatives who are on the varsity squad, those who are top recruits, and those that have been benched for academic ineligibility. So in our Andover area, we have 1 that's a top recruit and 5 that are benched for academic ineligibility. So that tells you the work that we have to do as coaches to bring them along. Okay, another group that is in our local area, but it's kind of between Educate Andover and Game On and how they approach advocacy is Goddard Advocates. And many of you may have heard of them as well, but they actually make advocacy as part of their district strategic plan. They do a lot of focusing at the district level, where Educate Andover will focus at the district level, but also highlight state issues that are going on. And then Game On obviously is kind of at that higher state level. But Goddard does a good job of just showing the importance of having advocacy as part of their, like I said, their strategic plan. And their superintendent's very vocal. He's been in media doing opinion articles and such on how what is going on in Topeka does really affect his district and their kids. They bring in a lot of speakers. They're one of the school districts that is part of the Schools for Fair Funding Litigation Coalition. And so they'll bring in the attorneys that represent the district and actually give a state of the school address every year on what is going on with that. They hold candidate forums. But like I said, they're another organization that we've partnered with and are doing good things. But the final example of advocacy in our state I want to give you is Stand Up Blue Valley. They actually formed in 2015 because of an ultra-conservative race in their local Board of Education election. They actually chartered as a political action committee and raise money and endorse specific candidates. It works for them in their area. They've raised money, they go out, they walk the streets, they put signs out. They just do a lot of good work, and it's worked for them. A lot of voter registration, encouraging voting registration. And they also do something similar to what Game On does as to voting. They have a voting hub. So they'll show how those candidates they've endorsed vote and how the candidates that they have not endorsed, how they vote. They use social media. Social media is in everyone's advocacy platforms today, but they do a really good job of keeping that very current. So we have all these groups across the state. There is another group that kind of is helping us all communicate together and stay on the same platform, and that's Speak Up for Kansas Kids. And this came out of the Schools for Fair Funding coalition of schools. They've actually hired a consultant to put all the communications together and have a way of being able to do action alerts whenever a bill is on the House floor debate, and being able to get emails and communications out of, you need to contact your legislature today, this is what's really going on. So they partner with these different groups that I have up here on the screen, along with 47 school districts, our advocacy partners, and just regular human beings that have an interest in what's going on. So if you have any interest in being on that list, I do have sign-up sheets over there, and you can write your name down, as well as being on the Educate Andover distribution list. Okay, so what now? Let's take it to 2018. What's going on? I've talked a lot about what happened in 12 and forward, but what are we seeing in our headlines today? And the message has not changed. I talked about trends. Well, the trends are just keep on chugging along. So in the latest Gannon ruling, which have had many life forms, I think we're in our 5th edition of Gannon, the Supreme Court did rule this last summer that K-12 formula does not meet the adequacy requirement. And it says that it lays out a path for constitutionality. We'll talk about that here in a minute and more in depth on the Constitution part of it. But you'll hear lawmakers say the courts are trying to dictate funding for our schools, and et cetera, and et cetera. And that is not what came out in that ruling. It came out that our state has funded our schools. They're putting money back into the formula that has been working for us for a long time, but the missing part was the money. What the legislatures did not do was they've crafted this bill that's going to fund our schools over the next 5 years. Well, is $1 today the same value as $1 in 5 years? No, so they've kept the inflation factor out of the funding, and really that's all that needs to be done as it relates to getting our schools back on a path of constitutionality funding. But we have people in our state who want to push for a constitutional amendment for our schools. And this actually has come up many times before. The number's been like 40 plus times over the years. But it made it to committee this year and passed in the Judiciary Committee at the end of April. And if you know anything about the legislative session, they run all of their bills through the end of April. Any bill that is not passed out of committee cannot then be heard on the legislative floor in the veto session after their break, when they come back in the first part of May. This bill made it out of the Judiciary Committee. Fortunately for us, the bill then was dead upon arrival, basically on the House floor. This bill, as far as constitutional amendment, in my opinion, was put out there because at the same time they were negotiating the funding bill. And so they needed leverage. Some of those people who don't want to fund our schools wanted leverage. If I vote for the funding bill, then we need something to take that away. It's the same game that's being played over and over again, but folks, the fear is that this amendment is going to come up this next legislative session, especially if one of the gubernatorial candidates, his name begins with a K, is put into office. This could be disastrous for our state. So we are trying to get on the bandwagon and spread the word that there needs to be no constitutional amendment. We need to save our schools. And like I said, that person, his name that begins with a K, has already made headlines that this will be a priority for our state if he is put into office. So let's just let that sink in for a while. All this work that we have done to get to where we are today could be thrown out the window. Okay, so here's where the paper and pen comes in. This is what I want you to take away today. I'm going to give you some reasons on why a constitutional amendment is not good for us and why the constitutional amendment does protect all. So the first reason, low enrollment schools are guaranteed equal education opportunity. Did you know that in Kansas, we have school districts that have 59 students in our school district? That's on the low end. The high end, here in USD 259 here in Wichita, we educate over 50,000 students. So do you think that the students that are in rural areas where there's 59 compared to 50,000 students, do you think that if we didn't have a constitution out there to protect the funding in those schools, do you think their educational opportunities would be equal? The answer is no. Less wealthy urban kids are guaranteed that the more wealthy schools do not get an advantage. And let me explain it this way. Like I said, Wichita has nearly 500 or 50,000 plus students. Nearly 90% of the students in the Wichita School District are on free and reduced lunch. 90%. The money that it takes to fund the programs in the 259 district compared to, let's say, a school district in Burlington, Kansas, where their funding basically comes from the Wolf Creek Nuclear Power Plant. The dollars that it takes for their taxpayers to raise in Burlington compared to what it takes to raise in Wichita is far different. So we need to make sure that Constitution is there to step in and provide those equalization dollars that come from the state. Similar to number 3, property taxpayers are guaranteed that they will not pay more simply because of the wealth of the district where their property is located. We could really get into the weeds on this one, but I will not bore you with all the accounting facts, which, by the way, did you know that school funding finance is so complex? I mean, I thought I understood simple accounting, but there is nothing simple about funding. But what basically this means is that the property values that is based upon what our taxpayers pay, we don't want that to tax our local people because our local taxpayers fund our schools as well as the state. If we take away the constitutionality of having our state come in and help with some of these funding areas where our taxpayers would really be put to the task on funding our schools, we don't not want that to go away. Western Kansans are guaranteed that their schools can continue to exist and not be reliant upon the whim of more populous areas. Game On and Goddard Advocates and myself, we went out to Dodge City and spoke with parents, administrators, citizens. We were there for a whole day. And the belief that no one is representing them in Topeka is real. That's what they feel like. So if we take away our state's obligation to support those schools where they may not have as many voices in our government, that's real, and that's a real concern for them. And all kids are guaranteed equal access to an adequate education. In my mind, this should be an exceptional education. Our kids should be able to experience that. In Kansas, we should be competing on the high end against other states, and in my opinion, against the world. I mean, we need to prepare these students to be and have the most exceptional lives that they can. And if we do not put these, or if we do take away these constitutional obligations of our state, I just fear that that's not going to be the path for our kids. So what can you do? Here's my task list for you. Be informed. Ask questions. I know I'm speaking to the choir here. I know you're all very informed, but I want you to tell your friends. I want you to tell your neighbors. I want you to tell your family why this is an issue and why we need them to be informed when they go to the polls and vote. Yeah.
So you said ask questions, so I have one for you.
Sure.
So you're in the largest district in the state of Kansas. There's 50,000 students in Wichita.
I'm in Andover. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We are. So on your list of all those advocacy, where's Wichita?
Wichita has not formed a parent advocacy group.
Why?
Good question.
I've asked this question for years.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make a point here.
Yeah. That's that's work that we need to do. We across the state need to get to Wichita, and even if it's finding 2 parents that have interest, we need to support them. So yes, it needs to happen. Wichita does have very good lobbying. I don't know if many of you know Diane Gerdstad. She has done a great job and actually tried to start the advocacy train in Wichita, but it just did not get anywhere. So thank you for bringing that up, and frankly, I'm not doing my job if I'm not putting that on my priority list. So.
I'm just trying to, like I said, I've asked this question for years.
Mm-hmm.
I put 5 through, and I'm putting 2 more through now, Wichita Public Schools, and I've asked it for years. And the PTOs in the local schools are not sufficient. It
Yeah.
needs to be something more broad-based.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, and I actually have not met her replacement. It's a gentleman, I can't tell you his name, but yes, Wichita needs that representation. Okay, so getting back to what I need you to do, thank you for that question. I hope you have many more. And I actually have cards over here with our contact information, so if you'd like to take one, it actually has our Twitter handle and also our Facebook handle, so you can add that to your follow list. But I need you to vote, and I know, again, I did not know you'd have these fancy buttons and that this would be this morning that Micah would start off with that passionate message of why vote is important, but you get it. Just get out and vote. Tell your people, especially when it comes to education, how these candidates are representing or not representing the best interests of our students. Oh, and I saw that button that was in the bag about how, I don't want to quote it. Can you hand it to me? Yes. Bad politicians are elected by good people who don't vote. So 30% of the population of those registered voters in our state are making decisions for 100% of us. Sad. It's very, very sad. Okay. The third thing I need you to do is don't be shy. Contact your legislators. This is something that people don't feel comfortable with. How do I even start the conversation? What do I say in my email? No one answers the phone, so why should I call them? Keep knocking down that door. They know that you are out there, and frankly, they do want to hear from you, so just do it. Just make that step and take that action to do it. On our Educate Andover's weekly distributions, we always end our emails with our legislators' contact information during the session, emails, phone numbers, and actually have put out drafts of an email how to send to your legislator, specifically when it comes to bills and technical stuff that people may not understand. So we try to use that as a tool to help people communicate. And finally, just say no to the amendment. Please say no to the amendment. Please share the message that this would ruin our state. It is so important that we get that message out, that a constitutional amendment, like Micah said, changing the rules so the other party can do whatever they want, that is not what is the answer to our state. So if anything, if that's all that you've taken away today, no constitutional amendment as it relates to school funding. And it's Article 6, by the way, if you want to look at it further. Okay, so that's all I have for you today. I want to thank you so much for allowing me to come, and I've given you a lot of information. I hope it's been helpful information, and I hope that you can take this little nugget away. And the closing thing I would have for you is, I heard this the other day at a women's retreat, in fact, just last weekend, and I'm going to steal it. You have an acorn. What do you think the potential of that acorn is? It can go into a tree. That tree can go into a forest. That forest can feed families, can feed animals. That forest can build homes. That forest can provide paper that allows us to do these wonderful things that we're doing today, giving this information. You can be that acorn. You can affect change. So that was the whole reason why I wanted to bring up that acorn, because it just takes one little acorn to make that change. So thank you.